To close out the holiday season, we're going to take a look at a slightly more obscure Christmas classic, 1947's The Bishop's Wife, starring Cary Grant, Loretta Young, and David Niven. When an exasperated bishop prays for a miracle to raise money for a large new cathedral, his plea is answered by the arrival of a very unusual angel. Rather than solving the problem with a snap of his fingers, the angel begins to turn the bishop's life upside down. But are his actions part of a grand plan? Or has the angel fallen in love with the bishop's doting wife? Often cited on this channel as being my personal favorite Christmas movie, the big questions are, will that claim still hold up? And, more importantly, is The Bishop's Wife required viewing? Yes, tonight we'll be talking about 1947's The Bishop's Wife. And if that sounds kind of familiar to you guys, check out it was a 3-part series we did a couple years ago, our top 3 Christmas film. And if you may remember, my number 1 favorite Christmas film was The Bishop's Wife.
Yes, it was. I remember that now. I mean, I never heard of it. During that episode, I knew what we had picked. And the only movie I felt like I didn't really know was The Bishop's Wife, because till this week I hadn't seen it. So there you go.
Great film, terrible title. In fact, the title was so lackluster for the time that they actually had to rename it Cary and the Bishop's Wife to let people know it's not this oddball religious film. It stars Cary Grant and sales went up 25%. So,
genius.
Many of you may have seen the remake with Denzel Washington called The Preacher's Wife, which I guess sounds a little less intimidating than The Bishop's Wife. And then you have Denzel Washington.
Well, yeah, first of all, I mean, I could definitely make an argument for Denzel being black modern Cary Grant. No question. I can see that. Moreover, preacher, absolutely. Like, I mean, the bishop implies rank. Like, usually if someone has to see the bishop, they're going to the principal's offices. And actually, the large element of this movie that focuses on the bishop having to pander to others for cash is very appropriate in its own right. The preacher is just the guy at the end of the road. The Preacher's Wife is a much more accessible kind of entity.
What was your initial impression beyond what Demo said about this movie? Because, you know, if I were to pick a number 1 Christmas movie, it has to be 1940s and black and white, and nobody has heard of it.
I'm glad you said that, because now I don't feel as bad.
What can I say except you're welcome?
Wow, we're just stealing lines from everybody tonight, aren't we? No, man, listen. What's my impression of this movie beyond what I've heard from you? Effing nothing. I hadn't heard of it. Are you kidding me? Bro, this was not a thing in my life. Granted, at least I knew what The Godfather was before we did our first required viewing. Now, Fireball. I have no idea.
And this wasn't a small film either. It was nominated for Best Picture that year, so it had critical acclaim. And then you have to point out that the mid-1940s had some of the biggest Christmas classics of our lifetimes came out during that period. I mean, you had Miracle on 34th Street. Of course, you had what was that little film called? Oh yeah, It's a Wonderful Life. The previous year. Yeah, so you had Jimmy Stewart's Christmas special. Now we had to get Cary Grant's Christmas special. And when I first saw it, I mean, I didn't have much of an initial impression either. It was The Bishop's Wife. I thought, once again, terrible title. I kind of resisted it. But Cary Grant and David Niven. David Niven I knew from the Pink Panther films. And this was my first introduction to Cary Grant. And a very intriguing introduction to him and his career, because after that it was Northwest and so forth. We talked about this in our first time with Cary Grant video in more detail, but Indeed. Going in, the only thing I knew, hey, David Niven, it's Christmas, let's see what it is. And this is the film that made me fall in love with platonically with Cary Grant.
Listen, let people take that however you want, because how many people could brag that their virginity to something was lost to an angel? I'm just saying.
This guy, from the moment he's walking through the streets and just like performing these little minor miracles and so forth, the film pulls off something which is incredibly difficult, especially with an A-list star. You're convinced that at least for me, I was convinced he was an angel from the very beginning of the film. The film didn't need to go take any extra steps to convince me. From the first 2-3 minutes, I'm like, you know what? I'm buying this. And it's Cary Grant. He brings this jubilance and joy to this film that is... it's 2020, so I hate to use this word, but contagious.
Oh, Jesus. I hear what you're saying. My impression was a little different. Now, granted, there was nothing that made me think he was a mortal with a bunch of Hollywood effects, which, in fairness, the effects that were used, considering it's a non-Disney movie for its time, were actually pretty cool. 40 or 50 years later, there's effects like that are said to be visually appealing because they were used on screensavers and video games in the 90s. So take that for what you will, right? In particular, I refer to the magical decorating of the tree. But you were convinced from the top he was an angel. For me, it was a little different. And I'm glad you're leading with this aspect so I can get this out in the open nice and early. Oh, sure, he was otherworldly. But I had the impression that he wasn't necessarily an angel. First of all, the dude is walking around in a suit. The face that he carries is not one that I would necessarily associate with somebody of or surrounding faith and religion in and of itself. Again, I'm not trying to imply that he was nefarious, but man, it surely gave the impression at times that he was, or at least mysterious. Not necessarily, and this is the cynicism of 2020, right? Like, we're bordering on, well, actually, no, we're past 70 years later, right? Good God. So certain sensibilities have changed, but if I see somebody walking around like he knows what he knows with that much smile and confidence about it, and there are certain moments where if you hit him the right way, his facial expression will change and he'll give you kind of a, really? And he'll deliver something. In talking about this moment, I'm going to fast forward to something. Stevens, the doorman for Miss Hamilton, now granted, was nowhere near as good as Briscoe County Jr., where we saw everybody's favorite doorman answer for Reginald, thank you. But he walks up to him late in the movie. We've seen Stevens because, the bishop had to go see him previously. So here comes Dudley walking in to talk to Stevens. And he's all, is she expecting you? No, but I'm the bishop's assistant. Well, we're certainly expecting the bishop, but we're not expecting you. Oh, don't worry. She'll want to see me. The way that was done and delivered, sure, we know by then he's an angel, but the thing I couldn't get out of my head was picture that same scene going this way. Is she expecting you? No, she's not expecting me, but I'm Dudley. I'm the bishop's assistant. Well, we're not expecting you. We're expecting the bishop, not his assistant. Don't worry. She'll want to see me. You see what I'm saying?
Now I'm envisioning a version of The Godfather starring Cary Grant, and it's much more likable.
Well, I mean, you get where I'm going. Like, and I'm thinking to myself,
he has a confidence.
Right, exactly. It has that air. He's not necessarily there to do. He has an agenda. I'll put it that way. Yes, that's a great way to put it. He has an agenda, and as well-meaning as it is, it's still an agenda. And there are people getting in their way, and they just don't know it. Or even if they do, they're going to be dealt with in a particular way. The person who it likened me, who I felt likened to it best, I don't know if this is going to offend you or not. Maybe this actually explains why this is your favorite Christmas movie, but I can make a strong argument that this movie influenced those who made Mary Poppins. Hear me out. Angel, granted, the way he was called wasn't as cool as the song with the two kids, play games, all sorts. Perhaps the most underrated song in the whole movie, as we said in the review. Go check it out. The punchline is this, though, folks. Picture male Mary Poppins and tell me how you don't get Dudley out of it.
If you want to make the comparison, it goes a lot further than that because it's essentially at its core. It's a very, very similar story. It's about this supernatural being coming in. Yep. Essentially, both Mary Poppins and Dudley drive the father, who's too caught up with work and is neglecting his family, drives him crazy until there's a confrontation at the end. And after they leave, nobody really remembers that these supernatural entities was there.
So, if we agree that there's truth to that, which you obviously do, and they're in the similar universe, there's subtle differences between Dudley and Mary Poppins, right? Follow me on this. So, Dudley, we know, is an angel, and he always goes, "Oh, I don't think you want to do that," or whereas, he's kind of like, "Okay, if you really want it that way, sure." But like Mary Poppins would do something like, "And do try to do this," and like it's if Bert weren't there going, "Mary Poppins will certainly tell you how to do this." Really, Bert, must you? This kind of stuff. She tries to shrug it off, but when she wants you to do something, she uses more compelling language and frankly mocks you a lot more.
She's much more cross. Dudley brings out the best in everybody that he encounters. On top of that, what the hell is wrong with this town? It's a freaking death trap. If it wasn't for Dudley, like babies will be hitting trucks, taxi drivers will be hitting trucks. Everything in this town wants to kill you, if not for God's interference.
Well, I feel like Dudley takes a lot more risks knowing that he's safe. Now, granted, the baby, I think that was a one-off fluke.
Without checking. Interesting stunt, by the way. Have these cars like coming within inches of the biggest A-list star of the 40s.
A fair point, by the way, about you. But like with the blind guy, like, dude, that's only drama because Dudley lets it be drama. I get that. But what I'm trying to say is this. Dudley's angelic, always this nice guy, where, to use your words, Mary Poppins is always cross. Are we implying that Mary Poppins is a demon?
Well, this actually kind of reminds me of a point I wanted to bring up earlier about Dudley's character. I think that's what makes this film interesting is that it does suggest a nefarious nature to him. You never quite know what he's really up to. At one point in the film, and which was kind of daring a thing to suggest in the 1940s.
Well, if you'd sent me to represent you with Mrs. Hamilton, I would have gone. You didn't, so I represented you with your wife.
Yes, that was baller as hell. But the reason why that was pulled off is because the table was set earlier. To your point, why it works is Dudley straight up says, "Listen, you want both. You didn't tell me which, so you don't know. You're going to pick one, and I'm going to represent you where you're not." The groundwork is laid to such satisfaction where you accept it. I would liken it, in another random analogy moment here on Hilarity by Default, to the Matrix. The rules are set to where they can get away with stuff, and there's not a Mickey fireballing thing you can do about it because you have been told the rules in a credible fashion.
Something else which it was uncommon for the 1940s, heck, it was uncommon until maybe the last couple of decades, where they actually represented an atheist in the film through the form of the professor. And one of the things that I actually do appreciate about the film is who's the biggest skeptic of Dudley? Who's the one that questions Dudley? It's the professor, the atheist, the skeptic, which makes logistical sense. But beyond that, the fact that they represented an atheist character in a religious film, no less, that it never made fun of him. They treated it with respect. Most modern Christian films, if they show an atheist, it's an incarnation of the devil himself.
Like AILO in a damn Spike Lee film. I get you.
The film does end with him going to Christmas Mass. It doesn't suggest that he's reformed or found religion or anything, because the film established that he was good friends with the bishop, and he liked celebrating Christmas to the point that one of his rituals was haggling over a Christmas tree, 10 cents a branch or so forth. I like the fact that they brought this in. And the film that has religious themes, they actually pit the angel, the atheist, and the bishop in this very interesting triangle.
You mention the professor as a skeptic. Bruh, who's more skeptical of Dudley then the bishop himself.
Well, the bishop knows that he's an angel, so the professor doesn't know until the very end.
Knows and believes are two different things. How many times does the bishop ask him to prove it, right?
And then you have the professor say, to the question of, if I said I was from another planet, would you believe me? And the professor's like, maybe, or something to that effect. He's quicker to open up his mind. But then again,
there you go.
And I think that's a good skeptic is also one that is open-minded.
Fair.
But let's face it, in a priest or clerical or even a bishop's position where this is your life, when you're actually confronted with proof or so forth, they need to be the most skeptical because they're the ones who can fall the most victim to it.
No, and that's fair. Like, how many people come up to him claiming to be angels that are totally BS?
I have to say, the interactions that David Niven has with Cary Grant in this film, I really enjoy it. David Niven is the king of dry humor. When he gets a chair stuck to him at one point in the film...
have a chair.
Thank you, I have one.
So great.
His exasperation, especially when he looks out the window and he realizes that Cary Grant it wasn't something he imagined, it's an angel, he's coming to work for him, and he just paws out the window. It's just the right level of exaggeration to not make it over the top or sell the wrong notes, especially for a film that has a supernatural premise, okay, of an angel coming to Earth to help guide a bishop and perform all these minor miracles. I like the fact that the characters, their reactions to the impossible are a little bit more subdued and realistic. I think it sells the concept better.
But for those who need a more modern example, it's from the David Caruso School of Acting. No, I get you. One could argue that the bishop in this movie had to be the most versatile actor. You had to be able to go from being the heel in a comedy to being incredibly serious on a dime. From things ranging to, dude, somebody's working it on my frickin' wife, who, by the way, and second, probably the most unbelievable thing about this movie, by the way, is that the bishop's wife looks that good.
Nobody pulls off the pencil mustache better than David Niven. William Powell comes close.
Going into a fight, that this character, and in some cases literally, one might argue towards the end of the movie, that this character knows he can't win, or at least should, to delivering probably one of the better heartfelt, religious-inspired monologues, aka the sermon at the end of the movie. You had to be credible doing every single bit of that in this movie to be a good bishop. And David Niven does his part. Listen, it's very easy to get overshadowed by Cary Grant for several reasons. On top of the fact he's genuinely talented as an actor, he happens to also be a gorgeous human being. And listen, I have no problem saying that. He's no J.J. Watt, but he's a gorgeous human being, and I understand.
Perhaps this is purposely so. And on top of that, the venue is different, okay? But David Niven's delivery of the sermon versus Cary Grant's delivery of the sermon, obviously, David Niven, at the end of the film, he's doing it to an entire church, and Cary Grant is doing it to a magical typewriter, so obviously it's not going to have the same passion. But even though you've heard most of it with Cary Grant reading it to the typewriter, when you hear David Niven actually perform it at the end, it's as if you've never heard it before. You recognize it.
Thank you for that. I know I'm cutting you off. Sorry. The fact that you say, oh, by the way, he has to follow Cary Grant and nails it should tell you everything you need to know.
So let's get to the actual bishop's wife, played by the beautiful Loretta Young. There's this scene in the film that is, from a dialogue perspective, beyond the sermon at the end, is my favorite.
The world changes, but two things remain constant. Youth and beauty. The only people who grow old were born old to begin with. You were born young. You'll remain that way.
Maybe it's a soft focus they use on her, but between Cary Grant's delivery of those lines, which, oddly, let's be honest, this is where a performer really shines, because the lines on paper are very cloying, but when they're delivered by these performers, they sell it. But then you actually see her and you buy it. You buy in her eyes and her disposition and so forth, that she is a young at heart beauty.
I mean, I felt young, you know what I'm saying?
Listen, you're trying to sell a character that is not only a devoted wife and mother, but you're painting this character as being beautiful enough in looks and spirit to tempt an angel.
Yes, correct. Moreover, over and above being of a particular age to have achieved some wisdom, and on top of that, being the first lady to a pillar of her community. That's a tall list.
If you couldn't sell that, you've lost the film. She is, beyond being she is the titular character, but she's not the main character. But if you couldn't sell her, you couldn't sell the film, despite how great Grant and Niven are.
What's the title of the movie again? Yes, thank you.
Cary and the Bishop's Wife. We want to get 25% more views here.
I see what you did there. Hey, listen, if we could perform a Cary Grant seance, it'd be a lot more than 25%.
What are some of your favorite scenes, and what do you think did not work?
There were certain aspects, and granted, an element of it is a limitation of the time. Moreover, it's not just about tech and technique here. What I'm more trying to say is there are certain elements that you are going to find in movies of the 40s. The skating scene was a bit long. The scene with the choir boys was a bit long, right? Now, there was a reason those scenes were there. I'm not saying cut them, but we're still in the age where variety shows are more the kind of appeal, that sort of thing. Certainly were to come more popular in the 50s and 60s, but that vibe was still in place, right?
Yeah, and I think even when I was younger, those were those specific scenes, those two scenes were the ones where I kind of lost interest, but that is, once again, it's a different time.
Right. They're tempo killers, but you saw that more in movies, right? I mean, there's entire movies that operate on just musicals on screen. Like if you look at Singing in the Rain, for example, that kind of thing was a thing. And that Gene Kelly, come on. Like Fred Astaire, come on.
I mean, what's one of the biggest arguments against most musicals is when a song stops the plot cold for the sake of a song.
Bingo.
And a lot of the musicals at the time, even some of the greatest musicals, were guilty of that. It just depends how effective they are. In this case, I felt that the scenes went a little long, but not long enough to detract me from the movie. With the choir scene, yeah, I understand, but they were showcasing something that other people would probably have only heard on radio at the time.
Oh yeah, that's a great point too. Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying there in radio being the dominant medium. There are also some what I feel like are awkward cuts in there, and if I'm calling it out, it has to be real bad. But again, we're back to that tech and technique thing. I think there's still an experimentation element here in place again, nearly 75 years ago. That still feels weird.
Well, I mean, the ice skating scene had some odd cuts, specifically because it wasn't Cary Grant doing those stunts. Oddly enough, it was a skater wearing a Cary Grant mask, which pissed off Cary Grant, because what a lot of people may not know is he started off as an acrobat. If you actually watch some of his earlier films in the 1930s, you'll see him doing crazy somersaults and so forth. So this is somebody that started off as an athlete and kept his athlete's build throughout his film career. But my point earlier was, even though these scenes tended to go on a little bit long, it was followed by something genuine that made it worthwhile.
And plot relevant too, for the record.
Yeah, the Bishop's Wife, her near teary-eyed reaction to the boys singing, or the scene with the taxi cab guy named Sylvester.
My pockets are just bulging with the coins of self-satisfaction. You want to know why?
I'd love to know.
Because you and the little lady have restored my faith in human nature. That's why.
Sylvester is a noble soul. His children and his children's children will rise up and call him blessed.
you couldn't achieve that if you hadn't had that ice skating scene. I guess it's time to get to the big question of the evening, where I actually try to explain why this is my favorite Christmas movie. But Kyle, I'll let you go first. Is The Bishop's Wife required viewing, recommended, or is it a pass? Or, and let me add an addendum, is it required Christmas viewing?
There's a lot of little details. Like we could easily break an hour on this show. And to be honest, the only real crime I would say to trying to analyze this movie is there's so many little things I could pick out, from the successful portrayal of dealing with and overcome the old biddies that might comment on every little single time they see Dudley with the bishop's wife. Whoever is that handsome man? And we could talk about the very subtle nuance of women swooning left, right, and center over Dudley.
The maid, I love how the bishop has to force the maid to go open the door, and like a few minutes later, she's rushing to open the door for Dudley.
I'm fairly certain, that there's adult adaptations of this where Dudley is getting all the play. I get it. No, I'm joking. But the punchline is
because he treats everybody, even the maids, as an equal. I think that's one of the interesting things about the film.
Right. And all the jokes we make about that, his appeal even to kids is a thing. Like, Dudley demonstrated as versatile is awesome. But I think the detail that does it for me is the exchanges, for lack of a better word, whenever Dudley and the bishop enter his office together. Who's being offered to go in first, or whoever walks in first, or whoever's asserting dominance at the time, whoever who's offering dominance at the time. However, the tone is set for the next scene in that office by what happens at that door. And it's friggin' great. There's so many little things in this movie that are done right. First of all, Christmas movie-wise, listen, if you want a good Christmas movie and you're sick of Christmas Story, which is really easy to do, please check this movie out. It's definitely required as a holiday viewing. It's been slept on for entirely too long. I'm not brave enough to call this movie required, but it's damn close. It's certainly recommended. I made a comment surrounding one of our previous Christmas month offerings here with the small one, saying that this is a movie I would not have seen without Demos' help, and I'm not mad about it at all. But this movie is too good for it to be as unknown as I feel that it is.
It is one of the ones that has slipped through the cracks a little bit, which is insane considering that it stars Cary Grant. But then again, let's face it, even when I was a kid, a lot of people didn't quite know who he was. I one time showed a picture of Cary Grant getting chased by the crop duster in Northwest to a girl in high school, and she thought it was Ulysses S. Grant. How?
No, she's just dumb. There's a difference, Demos.
Listen, if you were going to put somebody on the $50 bill, I'd have no problem if it was Cary Grant. But
point is well taken. I'm sure there's a career path where many a lady would slip a $50 bill into his G-string. I get it.
This film does not deserve to be a forgotten film that's only played on TCM once every Christmas. And I can't even say that perhaps it was overshadowed by its remake, because you barely hear people talk about The Preacher's Wife. I think I remember seeing it on TV around Christmas in the last decade. I asked myself, why is this my favorite Christmas film? And I watch a lot of the classics, big ones, small ones, in some case literally small one. And
I see what you did there, by the way.
Good, I hope so. It was pretty obvious.
Your face is obvious.
And this is one of those films that, when I'm about to pop it in, I think of some of those scenes. I'm like, I want to see the choir voice, I want to see the long ice skating scene, etc. And every single time I put it in, I'm reminded of how much I enjoy it. This film is Christmas in many ways for me, because it combines everything that is magical and is special about Christmas. Is one of the very few films, and I'm not even going to take the specific religious point of view, as this film doesn't mean much to me because of religion. But it is interesting that this is one of the few Christmas films that blends the magic, and the religion. And it's a cohesive, layered, enjoyable film. The jubilance and even that subtle loneliness behind the eyes of Cary Grant's Dudley character. That's actually probably the most unbelievable thing about this film. I do not buy that Cary Grant's name is Dudley, but regardless, I love the confrontations he has with the bishop. I love the confrontations that are had with the professor. I think the professor is a very, very key important element, that third in this triad of different points of view. And if this film is going to be about cherishing of all human life, you need to have that conflict. You need to have peace within that conflict to be able to sell that message. That's something I haven't seen many Christmas films do, or many religious films do in general. It sells its premise through example. And
just like Die Hard. No.
Yes, just like Die Hard. Ho, 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 I have a machine gun. You can't get more straightforward than that.
Awesome.
So that's one of the reasons I enjoy this film, because every single year when I watch it, I expect to be tired of it, and yet I'm constantly surprised by it. I constantly find other reasons to watch it, and it constantly gives me a little bit of that Christmas joy. I think the biggest issue that I have with most, especially some of the biggest popular Christmas films, is they always feel very, very plastic to me, as plastic as that Santa ass in Santa Claus 2.
As plastic as the leg in Ralphie's dad's lamp in Christmas Story. And side note, Demos, I don't remember if I named Christmas Story as recommended. I believe I was the heretic in that group that didn't.
No, you said required for Christmas Story.
So in light of that, then I have to, by example, or by extension, make Bishop's Wife required, because it's a better movie than, say, Christmas Story.
Forget the title. Give it a chance. It's good for the whole family. Great message, which is very much a progressive message in comparison to today about the excessive spending that you'll see in churches. You know, they want to get these big grandiose churches and encase names in marble, etc. And they overlook, some churches at the very least, overlook the things that people really need, especially this year with as much trouble as people are going through because of various situations. This is a message I think is more important and relevant to today. And especially considering that this film came out, 2 years after World War II? If there was ever a time for a message of hope, that was it as well. So,
oh, snap. Strong point, Demos.
Yeah, this film is... Oh,
you said
47, 2 years after World War II.
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
So this film has, the best way I can say it is a timeless message.
Indeed.
So, required viewing.